Monday, October 21st, 2024. I'm going to call to order the Board of Finance for the City of Burlington. It's 5:33 p.m., right, 5:34 p.m. And our first item is our agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
By Councilor Carpenter, is there a second? Second. Councilor Barlow. Any discussion on the agenda before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. Moving on to our second item, which is the public forum for the Board of Finance. And per our practice, we first go to folks in the room in person, see if anyone from the members of the public would like to address the Board of Finance. Is anyone here to address the Board of Finance? No, everyone makes eye contact now. I really, again, appreciate that. I think before in my early days, no one would look at me. But okay. So now we will go online, and I see former councilor, City Councilor Sharon Busher. So Sharon, you're first up. Welcome. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to address a couple of things on your agenda. The first has to do with the monthly financial review, which I really appreciate. I was hoping that at some point, the administration would do like a high level not overview, but highlight anything that the public and the board should pay attention to. You know, there's a lot of information there, but what are we watchdogging? Is there anything that you are concerned about or want to watch more closely? That would really be helpful. So I'm just saying that is something that did happen in a previous life on the Board of Finance, and I thought it was useful. The second thing is just a question regarding the downtown TIF audit and the errors that were reported and the information that you've shared. I know that there's been a lot, the TIFs are complicated, I realize that, and there's been a lot of attention paid to how things are followed and tracked in TIF so that there are no errors. And there were some placement of money, there were some problems in a big TIF project. I don't know if that's significant or not, but I guess the takeaway for all of us looking at this is how are we going to prevent those from happening in the future? And you've addressed some of them, but I think it would be good for the public to know what things are in place now to remedy the things that were found. So anyways, I'm not just talking about downtown TIF, I'm talking about our TIFs in general. And then the last thing is the purchasing policy. And I looked at that, and you know, it's been a while, and I agree that some of those thresholds need to be increased. And so I looked at the chart that really defined expenditures that require a mayoral approval versus those that require Board of Finance, and then the separation of expenditures that are, let me think, that are capital and enterprise versus non-capital, the other funds. And I'm not really taking issue with where those the authority is delegated to, but I do believe that when the mayor is involved in needing to approve something for a department, the thing that I think would be helpful is on consent for the Board of Finance to know, because those are sizable. It's $100,000 to $150 in one category, $150 to $250,000 to $250 in another category. And I think that if those were known on consent, just so that the board can be aware of how departments are spending their dollars, I think the board, the city council, and the public would be better prepared as you embark on your budget process to understand what the needs are and where the money is going. So those are my observations, and and I'm being very bold, and recommendations. So from a member of the public who cares. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. Appreciate you always being here. Is there anyone else online who'd like to address the board of finance and public comment? Public forum? Not seeing anyone. Okay, well, seeing no one else wishing to address the board, I'll close public forum and move on to our next item, which is our consent agenda. Is there a motion for our consent agenda?
To adopt the consent agenda, take the actions indicated.
By Councilor Travers, is there a second? By Councilor Carpenter, any discussion on the consent agenda before we vote? Okay, seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So moving now on to our deliberative agenda, and our first item is item 4.1 with the Department of Public Works regarding the Champlain Parkway Cooperative Agreement Amendment number 9. We have Corey Mintz with us. Welcome, Corey.
Thanks.
A little overview.
Yeah, this is the 9th cooperative agreement amendment with V-Trans. This is the continuation of our federal, state, local match grants for the project. You know, this additional 17 million to the maximum amount is anticipated to get us through the final award contract. Currently, we're at 65 million. There is a local match, our 2% of that. You know, so the additional 340,000 would be our obligation as a city for our 2% local match on this grant. That brings our local match for the total, I believe, up to just about a little over $1,200,000. It's local match for the overall $82 million grant funding that we are provided for the Champlain Parkway. This is just another continuation. We anticipate this would get us through the project, but there might be one final reconciliations done through the project budgeting. Just if there's any questions on this.
Any questions? Sir Travers.
Or I suspect this question will come up because it's come up in the past. I know it's in the memo that would be built into the agreement that the signals would be operationalized in Maple King neighborhood 3 months prior to connection to 189. There's been some discussion about the feasibility of a dedicated left turn lane onto Maple, I believe, as you're approaching Maple King neighborhood. And just questions about have you provided some sort of final feedback to councilors that have raised those questions? And can you speak here to whether or not that's an aspect of this that can be built into it in addition to simply operationalizing the traffic signals?
Yeah, I apologize, I can't recall if there was a formal response back to that in the previous council memo. But the intent really is that the design for the traffic flow through the neighborhood is to take them to Main over to Battery. And the intent was to not promote additional traffic and backing up of people trying to make a left-hand turn at Maple. You know, as designed, it is not a restricted turn. It would anticipate the most traffic would continue north and turn down Main Street. But there are options the city has once constructed that could change the signage for that location. But an installation of a turn lane is not anticipated as being part of the project, nor really considered due to its impacts of right-of-way, as well as it would significantly restrict, you know, it would be a redesign really of that intersection at this point. You wouldn't be able to have bike facilities, both parking and bike facilities in order to facilitate that vehicle with turn.
Getting into the weeds a little bit here, but has there been any consideration of if the intent is to funnel traffic up to Main and over to Battery, which I don't think is what happens in current state. As someone who does it frequently, I turn down Main. Any consideration of a sort of no left turn sign when you get to Maple or when you get to King? What's the plan for that?
There's talk of there's different options you could have. One of them would be a restricted left-hand turn, meaning that during certain peak hours, no left turns would be permitted. Either we could do some additional signage or changing a regulation at that intersection. Additionally, there was talk of alternate methods of traffic control within the neighborhoods that some people have voiced expressed. So between additional signage, actually making it a restricted turn motion, meaning signage or just full time restriction. But I don't think at this point, we don't think that a full restriction is necessary. It generally is during the peak hours where you're trying to maintain the flow of traffic to clear those queues that you'd want to have that type of restriction in place. But there are options. If you definitely understand that how things actually perform versus how designed, then you need to make modifications at that point in time if you see a difference. So that was one of the things that we did discuss as an option to address that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or discussion? Anyone like to make a motion? So Barlow would like to make a motion.
I would move to approve and recommend that the city council authorize the director of public works or his designee to execute amendment number 9 of the cooperative agreement for the Champlain Parkway project for continued project construction by increasing the maximum limiting amount by $17 million and a local match obligation of $340,000 for a total authorized maximum limiting amount of $82 million, including a total local match obligation of $1,640,000, subject to the prior review and approval of the city attorney's office.
Thank you, Councilor Barlow. Is there a second? So Travers and higher. Okay, so second by Councilor Travers. Any further discussion on this item before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Corey. All right, our next item is 4.2, the creation of one new position at the Burlington Police Department. It's a police receptionist position. And I will be pitching for the police department tonight. So I don't think I have to pass the gavel to you. I promise to be short and sweet about it. Okay, great. Keep me to that. So I'm presenting tonight a new position. This is an outgrowth position from, as you might recall, the full city council. One of the six recommendations from the community safety advisors this summer and fall was to specifically create a position like this. We, for many months now, have not had a person staffing the front office, the front entrance of the Burlington Police Department. And as I asked these community safety advisors to give us tangible things we could do to improve the responsiveness and the effectiveness of our community safety system, this was purposefully named for a number of reasons. One is it's very logical for people to go to the police department when they need help, they have a question, they need to. I myself have tried to return stolen property I've seen, cast aside, and there's no one to really easily interface with there except for a phone. And we want to make sure that we have a responsive system. And so we need people who are able to engage in a easier way and have that expertise right at the front of the police department. So this position, you can see the job description attached, of course, in the packet. This person will obviously greet people, answer questions operational wise or police service wise, get folks connect with the right aspects of either the police department or elsewhere in the city. That includes not only dispatch if there's an actual, criminal matter or emergency, but also our CATE program, which is the Crisis Advocacy Intervention Programs, for which our CSLs sit under, as well as a whole other number of services, including for victim services. So this position, you will see the position is step 1, it's grade 13, step 1. It would be a union position. That salary range is between, estimate here, 51,000 to 61,000. By the time hiring will happen, we'll probably be almost mid-year through the fiscal year. So that, Catherine, help me do the math, with benefits and whatnot would be within the range of about 41,000 for the remainder of this fiscal year. And to fund that, we are proposing using one-time funds for just to get us through this fiscal year from the right-of-way land sale that you might recall that happened up near Colchester Avenue. UVM did a land swap with us because of the tiny narrow piece of property that they were unable to use. So they sold. How did that work?
They gave us money.
Yeah,
They sold it to us, yes.
I don't know
They
why
sold
that
it
logic
to
was
us,
like so
yes.
tripping me up here, but anyway, so that was $112,000, so this would use a small portion of that to create this position. And then the Burlington Police Department would put this into their next fiscal year budget as an ongoing position needed. It is I think this is a pretty straightforward one, but I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
I mean, I'm fully supportive of this, so that's a great idea. But now that we're gonna put it in place, we're gonna also need to make provisions for when the person is not there, so I just hope that's done, because people will quickly get used to calling and getting somebody, and I understand that doesn't happen every minute of the day, but, you know, I'm just wanting to make sure that we pay attention to that, because I think once people get used to it, it'll happen quicker.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Councilor Rowland?
Yes, I also fully support this. My question is really around the earmarking of the one-time funds. Not a fan of that, actually. There was another resolution that recently it was brought forward. I think it was the public safety hub resolution, and in earlier drafts of that, actually, it tried to earmark money, and we had counseled Councilor Litwin that that's not a great practice. And is there a way we can find money in the current police budget for this position and not earmarking these additional general fund dollars?
Well, I wasn't involved as much in the details of that discussion with Shannon Trammell, the executive manager, I forget her official title there, to look at those other places that money can be pulled from. I think it's a really obviously helpful question as we try to make sure we're not going into the practice of using one-time funds. As I mentioned, the intention is to fully fund it with ongoing department regular funds for next fiscal year. This seemed like a very prudent way to get it started and immediately implemented, while we also make sure we have enough funds for the recruitment and the hiring, for which we all agreed was the priority. So I would be cautious, even though we know we haven't hired as many officers as we'd like in this first quarter of the year, or CSOs for that matter. I would be hesitant about pulling money from there to fund this position with not knowing what the rest of the fiscal year would be. So certainly not opposed to it, but this seems like a strategic way to get this position up and started, knowing that, again, I agree, I don't want us to be doing this as a practice with one-time funds.
And I guess I just add that I know that we'll have a budget gap again this year. And who knows how this current year will play out, the budget gap for the following year. We're not gonna wanna get into reserve. So anytime we can get this one-time money and sort of put it in a piggy bank, I'm sort of more of a proponent of doing that than to earmark it for a particular use within the current fiscal year. So if there were a way to do that, I will support this, but I would still, I guess, explore that. So I don't know if I need to amend a motion or that's not actually in the motion. It's in the memo. So I'm not sure if we could move this tonight and still explore trying to find an alternative source for funding.
I think you could certainly make it change the motion to say, and we will report back at the next Board of Finance, wherever you would like that with, would be a budgeted amendment at that point, right? If we're able to find existing, however the wording would be, but existing funds within the current fiscal year budget for the police department.
Okay, thank you.
Now we're going to write that down, so we'll get there. Any other questions or discussion?
I sort of lost the wording on that. I understand where Mark's coming from. It's gonna be sort of a moot point. I mean, we're committing to this position. We've also committed, to whatever 72 officers, and we're probably not gonna get them. So my guess is there'll be money in the police budget. There'll be money in the police budget, and I appreciate what you're saying is we don't wanna, if we get 10 more officers tomorrow, we wanna go for it. So we wanna know that we have enough money to do it. So it's just a balancing act, and I'm not quite sure how to get where Mark is wanting to go. I feel okay kind of either way. I think we need to do the position. And if we've got residual money at the end of the year, we'll have a conversation about where we're gonna spend that. So I wasn't quite clear what you were proposing or what is being proposed, so it's an amendment.
It would be my amendment to the motion, but I was trying to help help a colleague with the wording, and I was just gonna suggest a report back by myself or Catherine to see what options are available for a potential budget amendment
Okay,
to come directly from the police department if funds could be identified or something along those lines.
Maybe just as a clarification, the motion as presented, Civic Clerk doesn't mention where the funding's coming from,
Yeah.
so that would be sort of to be determined, I guess, understanding that should funding not be available, then the earmarking of this one-time money would be a potential source. I mean, I would be comfortable with that. I just would like us to get away as a board from earmarking monies like that, one-time monies. But that's just the personal preference.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to work with Catherine to just simply send you all an update on this as well, and to share back at the next Board of Finance regardless without having to make the amendment. That's-
And just to be clear, there's no motion on the table yet, so there's nothing to mention.
Right, we're just talking about it. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I think Council Barlow wants to make a motion.
I think I need to since I'm got us stuck. Okay, I move to approve and recommend that the city council approve the creation of a police receptionist, a regular full-time, non-exempt, AFSCME grade 13 position within the Burlington Police Department.
That Council Barlow, is there a second? Councilor Carpenter, seconds. Any further discussion on this item before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving on now to the Burlington Electric Department item 4.3, which is the VED Customer Information System Contract. Am I in? We had a thank you. Bye. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Would you like a walkthrough? High level would be great, just for all the viewers at home.
Okay, I'll start high level and I can go deeper as you wish. So we're requesting Board of Finance and eventually City Council approval to execute an agreement with a new customer information system provider. The company's name is Parkway. This would be a contract for a new customer system, a new customer portal, and a new mobile work management system, which would be implemented over the next 2 fiscal years. The contract is, this is a cloud-based system, so software as a service contract. It would renew annually, automatically, unless canceled by either party. The annual fees for all 3 systems, the SaaS subscription fee will be $145,250. That's operating expense escalated every year at the CPI times 1.25. The implementation cost would be a fixed capital expense of $800, again, covering all 3 systems. We've included funds in our FY25 budget for the FY25 work associated with this. There's a non-appropriation clause in the agreement that addresses the possibility that funds in a future fiscal year may not be appropriated. We selected this vendor through an RFP process that we started in December last year, preceded by some pre-work beginning April last year. We received 6 proposals, which we narrowed down to sort of 5 vendors who came in for demos and then 3 vendors who are finalists. And really for us, the selection came down to ability to handle our functional requirements, most importantly, a really robust, flexible billing engine. So strategically, the importance of this is to be able to do dynamic end use innovative rate structures that help us advance net zero by doing things like charging you a different rate for EV use off peak than your EV use on peak, for example. We really need a strong, capable billing engine. And also sort of a modern platform a modern company, cloud-based SaaS, doing updates and sprints every 2 weeks. It sort of felt like the right kind of partner for what we might want to do, some of which we don't know exactly what we want to do. So a company that would be able to sort of flex and move with us was appealing. They have been winning a lot of bids, and a lot of their new customers are munis, smaller munis like us. So that was also attractive. And the pricing was competitive. We looked at the 10-year cost of ownership, and it was either in line with or lower than the other bids we received. So I will stop there, but I'm happy to take other questions on this.
Questions or comments from the board?
I assume this replaces your billing system now.
Correct.
And this is somewhat irrelevant of this system, but I had a conversation with Catherine about our need to get all the city billing in one place with one similar methodology, be it ACH or online or, so I only raise that as just an issue that I think the city itself needs to look at, so, and we need for the customer interface to have a more friendly way to pay your bills to the city. I'm not so concerned about the back end, and it sounds like you need it. Just sort of keeping that all in mind.
Sure. Happy to talk.
I mean,
Whenever.
just because you have to fish around, I have to pay my electric this way and water this way and my taxes that way. Just so big picture, I'd like to see us have that all more coordinated.
It's like a great topic for modern governance shift
Yes,
conversation
yes.
as we think about it. But I also just want to
Yeah.
acknowledge and appreciate Burlington Electric is trying to work with, for example, our water division. And when we think about
good,
income
okay.
sensitized and programs being consistent, so you don't have to be hunting and discovering if you do qualify or not, and
Yeah.
it's different here. And this is particularly helpful for renters in the city of Burlington because BED knows who renters
Yeah.
are, whereas the water division doesn't with the way that water rates work in most rental apartments, if not all. So I think we certainly have that on our collective radars to not only on what we can streamline for its efficiency and cost savings, but also just really leveraging where other parts of city government have both the knowledge, the data, et cetera. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else on this item?
Just a
Yep, please.
one little teeny question. A while back, there was a customer who had an EV charging complaint. Will this system address his complaint? Like his complaint was, I think, that if he was like, if his timer on his charger was not set the right way, that he didn't get the preferred rate for charging.
We had an issue with a vendor, a particular charging company, where in some cases, even if you set the charger to the correct time parameters so that you could get our off-peak rate, in some cases, without the drivers knowing it, it was pulling, up to like a kilowatt hour at times that were random and that were not associated with that. And then that gets you off of the rate for that month, to the frustration of many drivers. So we've encouraged folks to reach out to that vendor, which has been ChargePoint, to make sure that the charger is working correctly. We're also really interested in getting additional charging companies to be approved vendors for us. So if we have 2 or 3, it'll make it a little easier to make sure that we have good workable solutions. And our tariff on that actually allows for what we would call dynamic rates. So when this system is in place, we may be able to move to a time that is not just static, where it's okay, you can charge off peak between 10 at night and the next day, but we can say charge off peak anytime you want, and we'll affirmatively offer to interrupt you. And if you don't want to be interrupted, then you would pay the higher cost. But if you allow us to interrupt for the 2 or 3 hours here and there where we have peaks, you can get the off peak ratings more often. This system will help with that. Probably won't strike confidence to know that our current system is Excel based for billing the EV rate, which is fine when you have a few hundred customers. It's not ideal as we get into hopefully having thousands of customers with EVs. So this system is going to be a huge improvement.
Okay, thank you.
PTSD from the state with Excel files and the state. Okay, we're moving in the right direction. Any other questions or comments? A motion on item 4.3. Councilor Carpenter, great.
Would move to approve and recommend that the city council approve and authorize the general manager of BED to execute with Sprite Point a master services agreement, purchase a SaaS subscription, and receive associated implementation support maintenance services for customer information system, customer portal, mobile workforce management system at fixed not to exceed prices, subject to review and approval by the city attorney's office and subject to appropriations for each relevant fiscal year.
Councilor Carpenter, is there a second? Councilor Barlow, any further discussion on this item before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving right along to item 4.4, Shirley and Catherine perhaps will tag team. And Kate, so turn out how to sneak in here. This is on, this item is the Downtown Tax Increment Financing District Audit, which is also called TIP. And it's our authorization for final transaction. Memo related to this. Who would like to begin?
All right. So I think some of you know, but this is a great reminder that we were audited for the second time really on the Downtown Tax Increment Financing District. It's per state law that we have to have all our TIP districts audited every so often. This was almost a 10-year audit of the district since its inception. We received that final report in January of this year. And I listed, I think all the bullet points from the report, but you can also read the report yourself too. And then the memo, I linked it there just for your awareness. So I think one of the takeaways I just wanted to point out is, because I wasn't really part of the waterfront audit, but I was here at the tail end of it. And I really just want to say that the city has done a lot to improve, well, really a lot, everything in terms of how it administers and manages its TIF districts. The auditors found all eligible costs for all of the projects for the downtown district, which was not what happened with the waterfront. We have a lot better record keeping and documentation, project accounting across the board. So we've made significant improvements in how we manage and administer the district in that sense. We've had a really great, with Joe on board in the assessor's office, we made some great strides in terms of how we're tracking and reporting on the OTVs and our parcels. We've got a really good handle on all of the complexities that make up our waterfront and downtown calculations. So we're really starting to make some good turnarounds there. But as you'll see in this memo, we still had a few things that came up in our audit results. And so the request today is to basically get some authorization to make the final bookkeeping transactions that are the last pieces of wrapping up this audit on the accounting side of things. Not sure how detailed everybody wants me to get, but I'm happy to go through each bullet and talk through what it means and answer any and all questions, but
Let's start with questions.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
Well, it could be just a really well written memo.
Tip does be complex, with some of the calculations and how it's performed. And so, I mean, maybe there's some questions there, but if not, I mean, it's all understood. Great.
Yeah, I think the big picture is all of the costs that were tested were eligible, which has never happened to us before, so we're very proud. But there are some mistakes, and as Ashley points out, that's frustrating, probably especially for Ashley, because she's been the one who's done almost all of the work to improve the processes. But when they come back and they're auditing since the beginning of time, we did not have those processes until at least 2022. So we have a lot of years of that audit where we weren't managing it and we did not have as strong systems in place. So I've heard from some members of the city council, you know, maybe some exasperation or lack of understanding about sort of why we're still getting these audit results. And it feels like we're still getting these audit results, but it's only the second audit, and now that we're done this, like, all of the audits moving forward should be on the parts of TIF that we have been managing well, and you should not expect to see this level of errors that would need to be corrected.
I mean, and I think I'll just say, as you've rightfully identified, I mean, that is the expectation, right? I think I appreciate the transparency with which you've brought this to the council. I appreciate all the work you've put into getting us to what I think is the pretty solid place we're in right now. But I do think it's fair to say that the expectation going forward is that, you know, we wouldn't receive reports like this, and I'm confident with the work that you've done that we're not going to end up there. So thank you for all the work that's been done, and I will look forward to supporting the motions.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, this motion is an exciting three-parter. No candy over in there. I don't even have the candy over here.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I really think you all are capable of a three-part motion.
Who brought the candy?
Oh. See, I'm transparent. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. All right, Counselor Kane, yes. Give that man some candy afterward. All right, let's make a motion.
Not doing it for the candy.
No conflict of interest. Sorry, your question?
No, I just do feel a bit badly. I don't do very many of them, so I'll take it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Counselor.
I move to approve and recommend that the city council authorize the chief administrative officer to take all necessary steps to ensure the reimbursement of both the city's 711 and downtown TIF funds in the total amount of $506,395 from remaining FY24 operating budget portion of the city's assigned fund balance. I also move to approve and recommend that the city council authorize the CAO to take all necessary steps to ensure the reimbursement of the city's downtown TIF fund in the total amount of $106,388 from the city's 711 fund. I also move to approve and recommend the city council authorize the CAO to take all necessary steps to ensure reimbursement of the city's traffic fund in the total amount of $134,653, the city's downtown TIF fund.
Thank you, Counselor King. Is there a second? Counselor Travers, thank you. Any further discussion on item 4.4 before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. A lot of work, and we appreciate that, and very straightforward. I know. For credit, actually. On to more transparency, item 4.5, which is our resolution, adoption of a policy on procurement, property dispositions, and approval authority for public contracts and related financial transactions from the clerk treasurer's office, although this also was a team effort with our city attorney's office as well. And a lot of people across departments, frankly, who were eager. This item in particular, when I became mayor, just to sort of queue up a little bit, this was the number one thing that department heads said would be helpful for making their lives a little bit, and their staff by extension, was to really get a handle on updating this procurement policy and having more realistic thresholds in particular, but just processes with more clarity and consistency. So this reflects weeks and weeks of work, and we are now happy to bring this forward to the Board of Finance, me by just extension, but a lot of hard work, and I just want to acknowledge that from staff preparedness. So, Catherine, pass it to you first.
Yes, I also just want to say a big thank you to Eric. This is something that for the 5 years that it did not have the input that we would have hoped for. This one, as the mayor mentioned, we had a very large, sometimes unwieldy group around the city who gave input, but it was a very helpful process. And because we didn't start from an old manual, there was an track changes version. I do have sort of what I see as the four main changes, and then I'm happy to answer questions, and thanks to those of you who sent some questions ahead of time. The first major change is around when we can have an exemption and not do a competitive procurement, but something sole sourced. The current policy manual is very vague. It says you can send something to the chief administrative officer, and if she says yes, you're good to go. It does not lay out the criteria upon which I would make that decision. So the new manual is very specific about what qualifies or not for a sole source. And in fact, it also lists several types of procurement that are not appropriate for a competitive procurement and should be sole sourced. And some of those that we've come up against in my time here are if BCA needs a very specific artist, that doesn't always fall into line of a competitive procurement, or some of the very specialized work we do in REIB, for instance. We made exceptions and we made it work with our current policy, but it's addressed in a much more holistic way in the new policy. To be clear, I do not expect sole source approvals to go up. If anything, I would expect them to go down, because now we're clear about what it takes to be eligible for a sole source, and there's less discretion. The second one are the approval thresholds. And currently, and since 2012, anything up to $50,000 a contract is signed by the department head, up to $100,000 the department head in this body, and over $100,000 department head, Board of Finance, City Council. One of the main changes in this version is having separate thresholds for capital and enterprise funds. Because, you know, as you've noticed, sitting here on the Board of Finance, there's a lot that comes through the airport or through BED because they're dealing with very large amounts of dollars, generally speaking. So we have suggested that their threshold be $250,000 before it comes to the Board of Finance. But on the general fund or anything else that's not capital or an enterprise fund, that would be $150,000. Two more improvements. One is around advertising. Our current policy manual just says, we'll put it up on our website. And a lot of people go beyond that, but they don't always. And so now it's very clear that we do need to make more of an effort to diversify who we're sending this out to, so hopefully we get more bids. So I think that's really helpful. And then the last one is about on-call contracts. And Corey and I were just having this conversation. You have probably noticed we use on-call contracts quite often in public works or water. And it's because we never know when there's gonna be, sadly, an emergency there. We don't have time to do a full procurement. So we pre-qualify some vendors, and then as work comes, we can give it to them. But again, we made it work with our old policy, but we didn't particularly have that codified of exactly how that would work. So this really clarifies that and allows us, when appropriate, to use that form of contract. Eric, what else?
And I just wanted to add one thing in response to the comment that we received during the public comment. We anticipated that you would want information about contracts that aren't coming to you. And so there is a provision in 2E of the policy that addresses that. And we talked to IT and got the feedback back that we can create a system fairly easily where any contracts that aren't coming to Board of Finance or City Council would be loaded into a sort of public facing spreadsheet that would provide information about the contracts that you're not seeing, so that there is that information for you and for the whole public. So that's how we sought to address that concern.
Eric, would you just comment a little bit more, just go a little bit more on advertising and our intentionality around PBEs and just disadvantaged business enterprises and making sure that we're doing extra efforts to make sure that city work is available to folks who own businesses who hold marginalized identities, where we may not have as many relationships as we hope to have.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways of advertising, solicitations of this policy. So that there's some discretion for department heads to kind of pick what works best for their contract, but sort of my favorite of the methods and the one that in my past practice has, I think, been the most fruitful is a list-based method where we're actively identifying based on who we know is out there, who asks to be added to the list, and who we've contracted with in the past, kind of who the players are in particular industries. So that if we have a contract where we're seeking a contract with somebody in X industry, we have a list of people who are in that industry and we're targeting them with our solicitation so that we're more likely to get things back from them than if we just put it out there into the universe. And one of the ways that we would be adding vendors to that list, the state has a database, that's the word I'm looking for, of disadvantaged business enterprises. So that's a federal term. It generally refers to both women and minority-owned businesses. We would be actively reaching out to businesses in that database saying, hey, we have these lists, we'd like to add you, is that okay? So that way we're targeting those businesses specifically in our solicitations and getting them involved in contracts here. The other thing is, there's very clear language in this policy that we do not elevate form over substance when we review solicitations. Sometimes, you know, if you're looking for somebody who's in the advertising industry, then, you know, high gloss, multicolor solicitations are important. But if you're looking for somebody to do electrical work, it kind of doesn't matter what the presentation looks like. It matters what their price is and if they're qualified. And so there's very clear language reminding staff that we don't elevate form over substance. We look to the substance of the proposal. And that's meant so that we're not awarding contracts to firms with the biggest advertising budgets, we're awarding contracts to
For highlighting that, because this, I mean, this just is another illustration of how we can really foster and center equity work in even these minor, very technical pieces around the intentionality and the list that we're developing, and then also attaching to the state of Vermont, who has a much more developed list where folks won't have to go to multiple sites and down city of Burlington, separate from the state of Vermont piece. And I seem to recall that maybe many years ago, long before REIB, I think the city worked with a couple of consultants to look at the city's practices in general, and one of them was, I think, a call out specifically on what are we doing for intentionally offering work for qualified bidders, of course, who are folks who are either minority or owned or women-owned businesses, in particular that intentionality. And certainly I saw a lot of that advocacy on the state level. So this is our attempt to do a good faith step in that direction, since we're updating this particular policy. Any other things you want to highlight before we open it for questions?
We got a really good summary.
Yeah, another good memo. All right, any questions or discussion from the board? Councilor Travers?
I have a handful of questions, comments, and let me apologize at the outset. I know you asked for these comments in advance. It's a detailed policy. Thank you very much for it. And we'll look forward to raising them here to your feedback to see where my colleagues on the board feel about it as well. So just sort of moving down the proposed article, the first is in Article 2. I agree with the proposed thresholds you put out there, so thank you for putting that out there. Two questions though around it. One is around the reporting tool that you're speaking about. So one is, if our CIO is creating a tool by which you can sort of easily see the different contracts that the city is entering into, my suggestion would be that include not just those contracts that fall below the thresholds, but all city contracts. I suspect your reason for that is because the larger contracts will be before this board and before the council, but if there's an easy to digest tool, it makes sense to me that we would just have all contracts on there, with perhaps an exception, which is that I think that contracts below a certain threshold, from my perspective, perhaps don't need to be on there and may be creating sort of administrative difficulties beyond which are necessary here. You know, I'm sure there's departments that are signing off on, you know, $1,000, $2,000, you know, 4-figure, low 5-figure contracts that truthfully, I don't know that they need to the second they sign off on that, be sending it along to the CIO, be creating work where folks are having to upload all of that into a system. So I would be open to both expanding that tool on the higher end to include stuff that becomes before the Board of Finance and City Council, as well as perhaps starting the tool at those contracts that require at least department head approval. If it's on that lower threshold where a designee of the department head can sign off on it, I don't know that it necessarily needs to be on that tool. I would leave it up to you all to, from a legal standpoint, figure out where it otherwise needs to live. The other thought that I have on the reporting tool is I wouldn't want these contracts to be backlogged in any respect, right? Where they're signed off on, but then it takes some time for us to find out about them. So particularly for higher level contracts that, you know, perhaps even those that require the mayor's approval, but not Board of Finance, City Council, I'd be interested in some time frame within which those contracts need to be uploaded such that the Board of Finance and Council can be made aware of them. Those are my thoughts on the notification requirements. There's one other thought I have on Article 2, which is that while I appreciate the desire for sort of the concept of pegging these thresholds to CPI, there is something clean about just keeping it at $150,000. You know, we know if it's $150,000, it's gotta come before the Board of Finance. If we peg this to the CPI, 150 becomes, you know, 156 and change next year, and 160 the year after that, and 162 and so on, right? Then I have some concern that future boards of finance, future councils, future department heads and so on sort of lose sight of what that actual number is, notwithstanding the fact that I know your office would be putting out notices around it all. So one thought I had is to actually eliminate the sort of tying of these thresholds to the CPI, and perhaps including some language that instead says that every 2 years, every 3 years, or at our request, you know, we can revisit those thresholds without them sort of automatically going up on a year by year basis. I have 2 other thoughts on 2 other articles. I'm happy to pause there if you have any immediate feedback, or I can just sort of throw it all out there and get your feedback. Should I throw it all out there?
Throw it all out there.
Okay, all right. So my second one is on the article regarding budget adjustments. I guess it's just a point of clarification, which is when that part of the policy says that budget neutral adjustments will be tied to the thresholds set forth in Article 2, does that mean that if a budget neutral adjustment, albeit budget neutral, involves more than $150,000, that budget neutral adjustment would need to come before the Board of Finance and City Council? Is that what it means, or does it mean, okay, all right,
Yes.
good. My second question around that is, if a budget neutral adjustment involves the restructuring or reclassification of positions, which we've seen on occasion here, I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of whether or not that adjustment would still need to come before the Board of Finance for the purposes of regrading of a position or restructuring and standing up new positions at that point, or is it your position that if the budget neutral adjustment falls below those thresholds, that regardless of the circumstances surrounding it, that it's not something that would have to come before the Board of Finance or the Council? So that's my question around budget neutral adjustments. And then my last question is around legal settlements, which just with Article 2, I would suggest that too be a threshold that's not tied to the CPI. So if we were to eliminate that for the Article 2 thresholds, I would also suggest that for legal settlements. My other thought is to not exclude from those thresholds monies that are paid for by our insurer. I get it, if the insurer is paying for it, it's not coming out of the city's coffers. But, you know, I can imagine a $200,000 settlement where the city's portion of that falls below one of those thresholds, where the city council is going to want to weigh in on that. Given the amount, given the potential media attention that a settlement of that value will receive, regardless of what the city is paying towards it. I would still want to make sure that those settlements have a path to come before the council so that we're aware of them prior to them being signed off on it and moving forward. So those are all my thoughts. Otherwise, I think it's a very good policy. Really appreciate the time and attention that's been put towards it.
Two, I can comment on. One is the budget neutral amendment. The intent is not to bring reclassifications to you. That would have to come to you as an HR matter, separate part of the budget implications. So that would still be the way it is in that regard.
Great.
The other is with the settlement authority, sometimes the way, because the city uses private insurance rather than like a lot of public agencies are self-insured up to a certain amount and then beyond that they're part of a risk pool. We're not, and so sometimes for our insurance contract, the insurance company actually has the authority to settle for us. And so we work very hard to stay involved so that we're aware of what's going on and they're not just out there doing things. That's one thing that Kim in my office works very hard on. But contractually, they have that right, and that's why that language is there.
Okay. Does that include even those items that don't require, does that include even those items that require contribution from the city?
If it requires contribution from the city, it has to come to us, but there are some items, and Kim could give better specifics on ICANN, but there are some items that don't require contribution from the city, and they have the ability just to settle those.
Okay. So if the insurer is just doing it on their own, and that's within their authority, I have less concern around that. It's more those items where the city's being asked to contribute towards the settlement. Yes, I think in the public's eye, it's more nuanced to understand what portion of that is coming from the city and what portion of that is coming from the insurer. So any settlement award that the city is having to contribute towards, my suggestion is that if the total settlement award hits the thresholds that are laid out in there, that the city council should still have eyes on it. But would be curious to have your feedback on, I mean, I can only think of a couple of these that have come before the council over the last 2.5 years. If there's other situations out there like involving property damage or slip and falls, those kinds of things, right, that have happened just without our knowing about it, because of what you're talking about, Eric, where our insurers perhaps have the authority to sign off on those. I don't know, would be curious to have that feedback, but that was just one of the thoughts that I had here, which is I can imagine thinking back to some of the settlements over the last couple of years that the council has dealt with. The city's portion of that has fallen below the thresholds that are laid out in there.
I would rather have language in there that says that the people with approval authority have the ability to kick the approval than to say that then it has to come before the council, because I think you're going to be dealing with a lot of little slip and falls and things like that.
Yeah.
Instead of things in the nature of what I think you're talking about.
Okay. That makes sense. I just would want to make sure that we're not finding out about settlement awards that are potentially subject to public scrutiny after the fact. So whatever language is necessary to that end, I think that may be an area where I would love to see an update to that language.
Regarding the CPI issue on all of these things, I take your point, that it's much easier for people 150, 250, rather than we get to sort of odd numbers, uneven numbers in the out years. And the intention certainly was that we don't go 12 years without revisiting these again. I would be open to changing that language to say that we revisit it every 2 years. That would be fair.
Either that or,
Or as
you know, depending on how other people feel about it, right? Even something that like rounds it to the nearest 5,000 or something like that, just so it's a nice even number that we sort of all know.
Can we agree that the CIO would have discretion to round it down to an even number? If we think about the wording of that. I see the point, but I also share the concern of us waiting too long to get around to adjusting these numbers. The numbers are sort of not keeping pace with inflation, which is what has happened. Historically, I mean, at one time, $50,000 was a lot more than it is now.
I mean, I don't feel strongly, but if you just came back even every year and just reaffirmed the number,
Yeah.
Period, like, don't forget, each year we'll approve the threshold limits or just that thing. I'm not trying to, I think whatever's easiest, I just think it's odd when you use a oddball
Sure.
things, so if it's
It's
every year, every
69
2 years,
Yeah.
And there may be certain products. I mean, something may happen in the marketplace that says, that's just too low.
I was just gonna say that a time, if we were gonna revisit it every year, we could just do it during the budget.
Yes,
So just be part of that process.
Lots of organization, actually.
Mhm.
It starts to become like
Good. yeah, part of the template.
any core,
Yes.
to be updated. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah, thanks for your hand.
Around the job, recalculations and stuff, and I want you to clarify again, what would come to the board, and if they're budget neutral, what would not come to the board?
What would come to the board is the reclassification itself. If there are budget amendments that would have to be made and they're budget neutral, then that wouldn't need to be part of the motion.
Okay.
You'd still be seeing the reclassification.
Yeah, so in almost any of those cases I can think of, you'd be doing a reclassification, a job elimination, a new hire. There's some HR reason that you would have to have, that would come to this board.
Okay.
So we're not gonna get out of it just because it's a budget neutral amendment, because there's so many other documents guiding us to come here because of the HR reasons.
So specific to that, I have two things. I've heard a lot of things come to us for reclass, that don't seem all that necessary. We need a water operator 2 and we want an operator 4 or something like that. And I have no opinion on that. So a lot of time gets spent on that. On the other hand, if you're gonna swap out a whole new function, you're gonna eliminate an officer and hire a receptionist, we'd absolutely wanna know that. So I'm tossing that out there and maybe you can ponder, cause we do spend a lot of time on some amount of reclassifications that seem not very, I mean, they're important to the department, but they're kind of within the department. And I don't know if there's a way to get at that at all or not,
I think the better way to tilt that is maybe we can talk about going forward, putting those on consent more often, and then. If it is the situation, I mean, that would give you the ability to say, no, wait, we do care about that, we do wanna talk about that. And if not, then it stays on consent.
Okay, I guess that makes some sense, because I'm presuming the department head has to go through an exercise to ask for reclassification.
Yeah.
So if they have to do that anyway, you can just put on consent and we don't have to spend so much meeting time on it unless it's a substantive change in function.
I mean, honestly, I think part of that is just the psychological aspect of people put a lot of work into those.
Yeah.
By the time they come to you and they wanna talk about them because they're excited.
I appreciate that, but
We'll also add that just in the reclass world, we are trying to make sure that there is much more consistency across the board. At the last department head monthly meeting, we did a whole, Reagan did a whole training to make sure all department heads are interpreting what a reclass is and isn't. And then we're properly using that, and also not sitting on them for long periods of time and clarifying. You're not allowed to give employees additional assignments that are outside their job description before you do a reclass. So we're working on other layers of this, separate from to make it a better process. Well, before even if we get to Board of Finance consent agenda or whatever it will land. So,
great.
yeah. Other thoughts, feelings, questions?
Great work.
Okay, so I heard a few pieces of feedback, so how would we like to proceed with this? I mean, right now the action is the resolution.
Right, that
Thank
would
you, Eric, but
approve the policy, so I mean, it depends on how. This still has to go to the city council, and so you're not actually the city council would be adopting the resolution. I mean, you could put, if you agree on the feedback, you could put the feedback into a motion and we'll make the changes and bring it to the city council as such, or if you want to see it again, my concern with that is we're sort of really eager to roll this out. And I wouldn't want to delay it, so I would have a slight preference if people all agree on what changes need to be made, just to track those changes as part of the motion.
Councilor Travers, I caught a couple from you regarding not using CPI and to your piece on something. Are you prepared to offer a couple of, I think they seem pretty straightforward, but would you mind just articulating them again if you are
Sure.
interested?
I mean, moving through the document, I think the first one would be an Article 2E, where it says the Chief Innovation Officer shall implement a system to log and provide the public information about contracts entered without approval by the Board of Finance or City Council. I think here I would suggest that instead of saying contracts entered without the approval by the Board of Finance or City Council, instead say contracts, and you can wordsmith this, but contracts that at least require the approval of a department head. So that sort of starts us at level 2 of the thresholds, not level 1. And that would be the obligation in terms of what this system tracks. So it would include, it would not include those first level, would not have to include those first level ones. I leave that up to you, but it would include the Board of Finance and City Council. And then perhaps, I don't need a specific date in there, but perhaps just add into this system to timely log. So I think that would be my request there, that the system would be to timely log those contracts entered at level 2 or above in terms of the thresholds.
Okay.
I don't know if there needs to be a motion on that specific item, or if we would package them together.
Let's perhaps package them together and do this one at a time, because I just want to make sure we're catching these down correctly.
Okay.
So I hear there is an amendment on the floor. So we're in Article 2 of the proposed purchasing policy update written, because as we said, there's no document that you can update this from. So we are at item E under Article 2, which is on page 5. And I'm hearing Councilor Travers that your amendment would be, this would read, instead of how it's presented in this one sentence, the Chief Innovation Officer shall type, where was your timely? Where did you want to add timely? Before the log, right?
Yeah,
So,
timely.
yeah, the CIO shall implement a system to, and then insert a timely log and provide the public information about contracts, and then strike the remainder of that sentence and instead insert contracts that at least require approval of a department head.
Correct.
Did I hear that correctly?
Yep.
All right, is there any questions on that amendment from board members? I'll try to do that as clearly as possible. Y'all catch what I was throwing over there? Okay, great. Let's take this amendment first. So is there any further discussion on this amendment? Before we vote?
Do we need a motion on the floor?
Oh, an underline?
I might suggest
Okay.
that if President Travers, if you're making the motion to approve subject to these changes, that be the motion, and we just continue with the changes. If there's a second.
Okay, then we just do one motion that
One.
includes all of those, and if anyone disagrees, then we can figure that out.
And we can, look at the amended motion, is that? Sorry, I'm usurping.
No, that's totally fine. I mean, we do need to underline, we need to make the initial motion before you do anything, because there is no motion on the floor. So
Okay.
how does that sound? Yeah,
That sounds one, that sounds good.
okay.
So that would be change 1. Change 2 is around the CPI. I suppose my question for my colleagues here is whether or not we remove the CPI reference altogether, or whether or not we sort of round it to some whole dollar figure, so we sort of have in mind, okay, it's 150,000 this year, it's 155 3 years from now, whatever it may be. What my colleagues feel about
My
that.
thought is if you just bring it to us annually and just sort of, if it stays the same, it stays the same. If you want to increase it, you increase it and do it as part of, I don't know, probably the budget of, this is. And ideally, knowing, we'll pick something for this 25, and then if you don't increase it in 26, you don't, if you do, you do.
So can I propose, beginning on the second July 1st following adoption of the policy, the dollar threshold set forth in this article shall be increased on an annual basis. Based upon inflation as part of the budget resolution.
I would just say reviewed,
Okay,
because we may or may not want to increase them, but.
And I wouldn't, sorry, I'm gonna jump the line, Council Barlow, but I wouldn't pass up the opportunity for some transparency in that budget resolution, so it's not just embedded in these policies, but it could be a standing, we have a lot of other standing clauses in that resolution every year, so it could just be a standing clause where we affirm or we, whatever, we state the dollar thresholds related to, because this is a pretty significant piece of our work, so I would be more agreeable to something along those lines where there would be whatever the verb is, but affirmed in the budget resolution on an annual basis. I also think that's very important so that this doesn't get lost.
Yeah.
There's so many things that get lost with best of intentions that we come back to, we update it. Clearly, there's so many policies that were last touched 10+ years ago. So I think that would help this be a consistent practice where it's stated there, it's seen by councilors in the future, mayors in the future too.
and I'm sorry, President Travers, this is your motion. I think I took it over.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think to try to keep it as simple as possible. I think going through section F here, beginning on the second July 1 following adoption of this policy, the dollar threshold set forth in this article, I would say may instead of shall be increased on an annual basis by the chief administrative officer or designee up to instead of by the percentage increase in the consumer price index. So that's sort of part one of this. And then that allows you to, instead of having to do it to a penny, right, you could put it at a whole $1,000 or whatever makes sense.
I guess my question is, I would like the staff to annually review them each year, and if we pick numbers that are too low or too high, tell us. I don't think we need to tie it to the CPI, I guess, I'm just. Because then we can argue what's the official CPI, and I just don't know. If we're gonna increase them, we're gonna increase them, whether it's 5,000 or 25,000.
Sure, it doesn't have to be the CPI.
Yeah.
It could just be, you all come forward every year, give us the number.
And we can use our own much, we could say something to the CPI, and you could say, great, not for me to say it here. It would simplify this.
Yeah.
Article, to F here that we're on
Okay.
as well. Want to try again?
Sure, well, I mean, then we get rid of the entire paragraph and say, annually on the. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we'll be able to come up with the exact language here, but I think it would be, right, annually as a part of the budget resolution, the chief administrative officer may, subject to approved by the council, approved by the board of finance, or give your feedback, increase the threshold set forth herein.
I would insert the shall for may, so that we make sure the CAO comes and reports to Board of Finance and isn't just optional. Sorry, but we don't want, again, this to. I want to be clear that this is an important piece to come back to the body on an annual basis, regardless of whether there's changes or not.
Okay. So annually, as part of the city's budget resolution, the chief administrative officer shall set forth the dollar thresholds for this article, we're not gonna kind of get it verbatim here, but.
If it's part of the budget resolution, I'm not clear on Catherine's role. I mean, she does have a role in helping develop the budget, but it's the mayor's
Okay,
proposed budget to you and.
you're right. So annually, as part of the budget resolution, mayor shall present.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, she shall.
Yes.
Okay, are
Someone
we,
will probably present it.
okay, not gonna have my
Don't
first
even need
vote
to say
yet,
subject
no.
to council approval, because the
Okay,
budget
excited to do
resolution,
this next year, right?
because the budget resolution is subject to council approval,
Yep.
so annually as part of the city's budget resolution. Updated thresholds shall be presented.
Thankfully, this is being reported, so our
Yeah.
Board of Finance members are
Okay.
clear on this. We're striking Article 2, F in its entirety and replacing it with essentially what I think will be one sentence, but what Councilor Travis was just articulating around the mayor shall bring this annually for a presentation for adjusting these amounts, to paraphrase, seeing nods of understanding. Okay, are we comfortable with that item? Okay, so moving on, Councilor Travis, for any further amendment, additions to your amendment?
So with that change to 2F about is now coming, the threshold changes coming forward as part of the budget resolution and moving forward to the settlement of claims language. I still think the language works in that the settlement amounts would be tied to any new thresholds that are presented by the mayor. And we don't actually specifically reference the CPI here. So it says these amounts shall be increased from time to time as described in paragraph F of Article 2 of this policy. So I think as long as that still stays as F, then we're fine. My concern here was sorry. Just had it. Where applicable, the threshold amounts listed in paragraphs A and B refer to the city's out-of-pocket contributions and not to amounts covered by insurance.
What article you want again?
Sorry, this is Article 14C. So the first sentence of that is fine. My concern was where applicable, the threshold amounts listed in paragraphs A and B refer to the city's out-of-pocket contributions and not to amounts covered by insurance. It being understood that settlement authority for claims covered by insurance is addressed by insurance contract. I don't know specifically how to wordsmith this, but I just want to be careful that if there is a city out-of-pocket contribution for a settlement award that exceeds a threshold that requires council approval, that would still come before the council. That's the intention there. And it's only if the city is making an out-of-pocket contribution to an overall award that would be in excess of $150,000.
I would like to make a suggestion, and if doesn't solve your concern, then that's fine, but I think we will have a good sense of the kinds of issue the council wants to see, and it may not be so much about dollar value as about sort of the public attention to the litigation. And so it might satisfy your concern to add an E, paragraph E, that indicates that those with approval authority under this article shall have discretion to take items to the city council and board of finance. And I guess I want to think more about the specific language of that, but it's just to convey the idea that, you know, just because you have the authority, if it's a matter that the council will have interest in, you should still bring it to them regardless of the dollar threshold, regardless of who's paying bills. Because I don't think you want to see slip and rolls and whatever. I don't think that's the intent here.
Isn't it that we want to see, or I would want to see insurance claims that equal the total of the thresholds, even if we don't pay anything on them? We can't approve them, but we want to know them.
I think there will likely, we've already had in my tenure, a couple of.
Yeah.
One settlement I could think of that I would have brought to the council regardless of what this said, but I think what you would want, regardless of who the mayor is, to be brought, that would have been below. The out-of-pocket contribution would have been below any of these thresholds we're talking about.
So if we just say total as opposed to out of pocket, is that too burdensome?
Again, I think that it's more the nature of the
Yeah.
case, and I don't know how to say that in this phrase because I don't want slip and falls, but there are. Yeah, I have no idea how to phrase this, to be perfectly honest, because it's pretty discretionary about what I would consider important, what you might consider important, but there is a distinction between run of the mill and matters of important public policy. I have no idea how to word that.
Right, and if the way it's worked right now, below 50,000 city attorney, up to 100,000 city attorney, chief administrative officer, and mayor. So I think when we're looking at who has the approval authority, I think we can trust those individuals to know what should be coming before council and not. And that's why I'm suggesting that there be an E that says that, you know, those with approval authority shall have discretion to bring other things within their authority to the Board of Finance and City Council. You know, I think you can trust an official as high as the city attorney and the CAO and the mayor in concert to know this is gonna have media attention around it, the council's gonna wanna know.
Yep, there's another part of this, under Article 2, we use the term that cost ineffective or controversial are the terms that we used around the approval process as being intended to allow the administration an opportunity to request more information about contracts that may appear cost ineffective or controversial. And perhaps we could use that language as well, you know, for those settlement agreements that do not require council approval, but nonetheless may be cost ineffective or controversial, that the decision makers, whoever they may be, at their discretion, may still bring that matter to the Board of Finance and City Council for their approval. Something like that. As a meeting.
Yeah, I like that consistency too, the mayor, we already stated in Article 2. Any other input on this, which will now be a new Article 14E to capture the intention here to bring settlements to council, but I'm paraphrasing again, but that might be have to be controversial in nature or not cost effective. On those lines. Okay. Is there anything else, President Travers?
No, that's it.
Was not needing that to be
No.
throwing any shade whatsoever. Okay, so I hear that we have 3 amendments. And Eric, I see you have typed on your phone. Would you like
Well,
to share?
I'm not using my computer to a technical issue. I broke my pencil during this meeting, so I've been using my
Wow.
phone to write things.
Dedication. He truly has put so many hours into this policy, this is by extension. Shows you how dedicated it is to the finish line, yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
so approve as proposed, subject to 2E. If the contract requires department head approval or it's above that threshold, then it would be subject to this requirement, and we're adding the language timely logged by the IT director. 2F, we're saying that annually as part of the budget resolution, the mayor shall present updated thresholds to the city council for approval. And 14E, settlements that otherwise would not require Board of Finance or City Council approval, but that may nonetheless be cost ineffective and controversial, shall be brought to the City Council and Board of Finance in the discretion of those with approval.
And Eric, just so I heard you correctly, on Article 2E, it was adding the timely, but also changing the end of that sentence as well, right? To include, instead of how it's written, we'd read instead contracts that at least require approval of the department head.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Right.
Trying to be thorough here, it's 7 o'clock tonight.
Between the 3 of us, and
We will get this, and we are recording, which is so helpful.
yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that is motion by President Travers. Consenting over there, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilor Carpenter seconds the amended motion. Is there any further discussion on the amended motion on the procurement policy for us? Okay, seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. This is a historic moment.
Thank you.
Right of the world. Okay, and with that, I don't believe we have any other business items. So with that, I will adjourn the Board of Finance with City of Burlington at 6:58 PM. Thank you very much.